Hello, Guyana, and welcome to another edition of Conversations in State. Of course, this is the first edition for the year 2019. And of course, since this is the first time I'm having this program, even though it's way down in January, I'm still going to say Happy New Year to you. Thank you so very much for joining us. And of course, I wish you all the great things that you wish yourselves for the rest of this year. Now, I think we're starting off Conversations in State for this year on a very, very good note. Because we live in an era, and of course in a society whereby the call is always for there to be more to be done for our youths, regardless of whether you're in government, whether you're in politics or out of politics. There is always this call, at least in the last 5 or even 10 years, I can go as far as a decade. There has always been this constant call for there to be more being done for our youth population. And it is my pleasure to welcome to our program today. Of course, he is no stranger to this program. I'm going to call him a matured youth. And of course, we always have to look to our elders to give guidance and so on, and to help and to give advice on how we can really and truly address some of the youth issues. So it is my pleasure to welcome back to our program today. We wears many hats, but we're just going to focus on one. He is the co-author of the Guyana 21 and Guyana 2030 plans, and his name is Eric Phillips. So welcome to Conversations in State.
Welcome and a belated Happy New Year.
All right, great. Thank you so very much for that. Youth policy. I know you have been, at least for the length of time that I've known you, you've been big on youth. Now, viewers, just to give you some idea, today we're basically focusing on the Youth and Village Development Program. You also know that Mr. Phillips is big on community development and village development. But let's talk about youth policy first, before we talk about anything else. You have this program, or I should say plan. That means you are not satisfied with what is there either on paper or off paper that should be addressing Guyana's youth at this time. Let's talk. Why this, even before we talk about the program in itself, why this program at this point in time?
For the last decade, and perhaps 15 years since I've been back from South Africa, I've heard about a youth policy. In the previous government, the IDB had funded something, nothing came out of it. I know there is a current youth policy being developed.
Okay.
But what we really need is a youth plan. A policy does nothing to create jobs. We need a plan that is aligned to our economic strategy so that jobs will be created for young people aligned to our economic policy. So a youth policy has to have context. The policy has to have a strategy, and the strategy must have a plan. So I have yet to see a youth plan. For example, our youth need land. What is the strategy to get land to our youth? And what is that aligned to? Is it aligned to them graduating from high school? Is it aligned to them graduating out of UG? We are an agrarian country. We now have oil. But our wealth is still in agriculture. We have over 200 fruits and vegetables. We should be doing moringa. We should be doing so many things. So my point is that we have too many policies and not enough plans. And if you're talking about youth employment, you have to understand what is the employment profile of the country, what's our educational system, because you can't create jobs that our youths can't take up. And right now, that is the situation.
All right, great. So we've identified the problem. I'm tempted to ask you then, why is it so difficult? Because we keep talking about it's become a cliche now. Youths are the future. Youths are the future. You become. I think sometimes the youth themselves become tired of hearing it. So good. We've gotten the problem out of the way. One of your solutions, obviously, is this youth. And viewers, I must tell you, it's a comprehensive document. I don't know if Mr. Phillips is ready to share it as yet, but I know you've shared it with the government.
Yes.
You're also working with the government to
Yes.
see this come to fruition. Youth and Village Development Program. Why youth and village? Why have you grouped the two?
Well, Guyana is based on villages. We have a lot of land in our villages. Our youth live in our villages, and the villages are about economic development.
Okay.
If you were to look at the current job creation in Guyana, and this is something that people misunderstand, the government creates about 80% of jobs. So when people say the government is not producing jobs, they're misinformed or they're not understanding how the economy works. Apart from all the jobs that are in the government, 70% of our national budget is through procurement by the private sector. So that procurement actually helps the private sector create jobs. So the government right now creates about 80% of all jobs. It's the private sector that isn't creating jobs for our young people, because that's where the jobs should be created.
But,
and why?
But let me just interject here even before we come to the private sector. So then in essence, because I want people to get this clear, in essence, it is unfair to jump up and say that we have this unemployment rate, that unemployment rate, and we should blame the government.
Right, it's unfair, absolutely unfair. The private sector argues they're the engine of growth. So they should be creating growth and creating jobs.
Why have they not created the jobs?
Well, if you look at our private sector, and 5 years ago I did a document for the IDB, Inter-American Development Bank. We have a very weak private sector.
Okay.
We have an ethnically skewed private sector. We have a private sector that doesn't manufacture. We have a private sector that doesn't have technology. So as you see today, oil is here, and our private sector can't participate. We don't do any R&D. So our private sector are really traders. They buy and resell. They're not manufacturing. And if you look at the jobs that are currently being created in our environment, it's the Chinese, again reselling. It's the Cubans coming in. It's the Brazilians. So our private sector has failed miserably in creating jobs. And that is why they're complaining now about local content. The local content is critical to Guyana's national security, and I'll come back to that. But they cannot participate in this oil sector because they don't have the technology, the capital, the production methodologies, the certification, or educated people. We also need to realize that when you create jobs, you have to have people who can take these jobs up. In 2017, there was a labor study that showed that 50% of Guyanese have not gone beyond the primary school.
50%.
50%. It is shown that only 2.3% of Guyanese have degrees above a bachelor's. It shows that 25% of our people have diplomas. It shows that 50% of our people are really uneducated. And if you have an uneducated nation, you will have a poor nation. We have all these resources. So our education system is not aligned to creating jobs.
Mr. Phillips, on the education, I want to interject here, especially regarding the education sector. We have a president, and we're grateful for that. We have a president who has, security aside, one of the things he has constantly campaigned on, not only campaigned, but he has constantly ensured that, look, the public, the citizens, our Guyanese citizens understand the importance of education. And he has, I would say, gone above and, beyond to ensure that the even though it's not fully there yet, the education system has been restructured in terms of, for example, providing the boats, the buses, the 5Bs
and
program,
school feeding
and
programs and all of that.
Given all of the challenges, the things that you've identified, talking about the limited amount of people, whether it's primary, secondary education, diplomas, degrees, and so on, do you believe that the president, his vision, and of course along with his team, can eventually achieve what you're basically saying that it's lacking at this point?
The president has defined the problem and has taken steps. But it needs to be a partnership.
Okay.
Our entire education system needs to be reformed. For example, we're pushing IT and robotics and all of that.
Yeah, STEM.
And that's important. We call it STEM, but it's not STEM.
Explain.
That's just information technology.
Okay.
STEM is science, technology, engineering, and math. Half of our country are failing math, half failing English. So we have to look at the real issue. IT is an enabling environment. We can teach everybody about IT, and all we will do is download. We need to be uploading, because uploading is content, and content is about science, it's about technology, it's about engineering, it's about math. UG has not graduated a single physics student in the last decade. We're now trying to change that. So the president has identified the problem, but we keep misusing terms. Yes, we need STEM, but we're doing nothing about STEM. Because STEM is about getting more students in science, getting more students in engineering, improving our math, and improving our link with the diaspora where we have lots of engineers. So words are being bandied around. And that's why I'm saying that we don't need a policy. We need a plan, because the plan will identify what are the key determinants of success. And the key determinants of success, especially in an oil economy, are science, it's technology. Now we're looking at a green economy, so we need to deal with environmental law, we need to deal with environmental science. All these things are not in our educational system. So we have to reform our educational system along with the things that the president is doing. And the private sector has to be part of that. The private sector has to say, what are the key technologies we need to successfully compete, not only in oil and gas, but in the Caribbean. We have over 200 fruits and vegetables, yet we don't process anything. We're buying plantain chips from Barbados. That's ludicrous. We need to go back to what are the key determinants of success. Reform the educational system, restructure the private sector, do R&D. Take, for example, what all governments have been doing. There's a small business bureau. We give them $1 million US, which is a penny. Put 200 million US in it, and then help our young people to do the jobs that the Chinese are doing. The Chinese aren't smarter than us. They have supermarkets. There's nothing big about a supermarket. All that happens there is that the Chinese have money from their government, and they come into Guyana, and they open supermarkets, and they crowd out our little stores. If we had 200 million, our young people could go and get the money, because getting the products for a supermarket are simple once you have the money. So I'm saying we need to rethink what we're doing. We have a lot of Brazilians here creating jobs. We have now a lot of people creating jobs because the Cubans are coming here. We have the Chinese monopolizing many sectors, and it's unnecessary. And then there are other policies to nurture that. We should have a land policy that only Guyanese can own land. And then we give our young people land based on some sort of educational graduation, so that they now have land to put into deals as equity, or they now have land to build homes. So we have all the resources. Look, we have the 4 most important products in the world. Oil, the #1 product in the world. Gold, the #2 product in the world, but we don't do anything with gold. Water is scarce. We're the second most endowed nation in the world with fresh water and land. Everyone here is coming to monopolize us, to colonize us, and to create jobs for themselves. When we just have to think properly. The issue with our educational system is reflected in our planning process. We don't have thinkers.
Okay. I want to come back to something you said. Even again, we still have your document, which I know you've already shared with the government to talk about. But just before we do that, viewers, if you're now tuning in, of course, this is Conversations in State. We're talking with Mr. Eric Phillips, and it's all about identifying the problems and finding the solutions, especially where it relates to youth development, jobs, and more or less, the youth like to hear, yes, putting money in your pockets. You talked about the fact that, let me use your example, plantain chips. We're still using plantain chips in the fancy package from, yes, yeah. from another sister CARICOM country. One of the institutions we have here is the IAST, and of course I've had Mr. Suresh Narayan on this very program himself, and more than once, and he talked about all the great things that they're doing.
And they are.
Great. That's what I want you to talk about now. The fact that they're doing the great things, and if you believe that maybe we need, I know it's not going to happen overnight, this is not a fairy tale, but if we need another institute like that, and how much aid they really can give in terms of us more or less feeding ourselves and promoting ourselves.
But we're not feeding ourselves, and that's a massive opportunity for job creation. IAS has created many products. We know about Rupanuni Essence, we know about Morning Glory, but they have all sorts of products, including creating things for your roof out of rice. But that's IAS. But it comes back to some other issues.
Yeah.
What is our science and technology policy? How many scientists and engineers do we have in Guyana? We don't even know that. What is our industrial policy? And therefore, what's our youth policy and youth plan? We do youth policy out of context. What is our economic vision? We have 5 options for Guyana. We can become a commodity-based producer, which is what we are. Rice, sugar, etc. We can become a transshipment hub, which is what the Guyana 21 and Guyana 2030 plans were. Road to Brazil, Deepwater Harbor, and the Brazilians have been pushing that. The Brazilians have said, if you build a Deepwater Harbor and create a road to Brazil, which we will help you build, our imports and exports through Guyana will move from $238 million to $7 billion. And they've showed that.
Okay.
Because a lot of the manufacturing in Brazil needs to come through the road to Brazil into Deepwater Harbor within a day versus the 9 days it takes to go through Brazil. And there are a lot of, so the inputs would come in through Guyana, through Deepwater Harbor, the exports would go up, $7 billion.
Okay.
So we need to have a linked strategy. So we have commodity, road to Brazil or hub, an oil and gas economy, which is what we're talking about now. Or a green economy with an oil sector, which is our best strategy, which is what the president is pushing.
If we can really have an oil and gas economy, or that can just be one of the
the many
legs of the economy.
But here's the issue: for the oil and gas economy, we don't have the workforce, we don't have the UG grads, we don't have people who are educated. So we'll be importing Trinidadians and foreigners forever. So we have to understand that and create programs. I see UG's announcing a master's in petroleum engineering, but it will take time. But we cannot become an oil economy. Okay. Because if we become an oil and gas economy and the industrialization behind it, we can be captive like Venezuela or Trinidad. When oil prices go down, we suffer. So we have to have a green economy, and we use the oil funds from the oil sector to drive it. Because the green economy is about sustainability. It's about COP21. It's about environmental. It's about climate change. I mean, here's another area where we could be creating wealth. We have forests. When Norway signed that deal with us, LCDS, they gave us $250 million over 5 years. That's $5 per carbon ton. If we were to create a carbon market, and sell our carbon credits at $25 a carbon ton, which is what's going on, we would be so much wealthier. So we say the Exxon deal is bad, and it is, but the LCDS deal was horrible. They gave us $5 a carbon ton when we could be getting 25. But we could be creating jobs through a carbon market and how we preserve our forests. But so we have 5 options, right?
Yeah.
And with each of those options, we need to map our educational resources, our youth resources. So we need to realign our educational system so in time, when the jobs are created, and they will be created, our youth are there. So right now there's a total misalignment. I mean, our young people are complaining about jobs. I asked them a question: what jobs do you want? What jobs are you qualified for?
What are the responses?
And then we get no answers. The government is already creating 80% of the jobs. They should be having a summit with the private sector to say, hey, private sector, what jobs are you creating?
I'm inclined to believe that after this discussion, the private sector I can't speak for the private sector, but I'm inclined to believe that you may get some amount of challenge, some amount of pushback in terms of prove
they
what
can't
you're
push
saying.
back because they know what I'm saying is true. And 5 years ago, I wrote a document, Challenges and Opportunities Facing the Private Sector in LCDS. I also did a study for the IDB, the structure of the private sector. Our private sector, listen, there are 5 types of companies in the world: domestic companies, exporters, international, multinational, and global. We have no international company, no multinational company, no global companies. We have a ton of local companies that can't really compete. And then we have some exporters. So we have a private sector that is inadequate because we can't compete. Of course, they'll say we didn't have energy, and that's true. Because Trinidad had a 6% advantage in us because they had cheap energy. Well, cheap energy is coming. What are your plans to manufacture, to become competitive, to take these 200 fruits and vegetables and create jobs, to create corps, to create jobs for our young people? The private sector has failed. And what they have done, they've aligned themselves as an ethnic bloc and creating other issues for us that don't create jobs, like what they did when we had the increase in exchange rate. So I don't want to talk about the private. I spent 30 years in the private sector, both here and internationally. They can't challenge me.
All right, great.
Well, let them challenge me.
Well,
not that they can.
We went to see. All right, now let's come to the Youth and Village Development Program. Again, and I keep stressing the fact that you've shared this with government because certain things must go through there, even though you're saying that, look, it is not necessarily the government's job to create all of these jobs for everyone. It's practically impossible. your plan and your program, let's talk about some of the things, as much details as you can possibly give, that are entailed in this document. And can we guarantee that it will eventually become more than just another document sitting on someone's? Because I think that's
Well,
what
today
happens
I
with
went to
youth.
2 villages to talk about
Good.
it.
Great.
But let me set the stage, because we have to take what we have today and create jobs. All the other things I spoke about, realigning the educational system, science and technology, R&D, the private sector, will take time.
Okay.
One of the first things our government should have done, given the understanding of the educational system, and by the way, the study was 2017, so they only recently saw it, but they should have sensed it, was to understand the workforce and to make sure that we create programs that would help them. One of the first things I would have done was create a national service and take all these folks who've never gone beyond primary school, who are good with their hands, put them into a 1-year program, look at where the economy is going, and skill them. Teach them about agro-processing. Teach them about all these other things that they can then leave national service and create jobs and be exporters. But then along with that would be a land policy, because you'd want them to come out and have land. You'd want to put them in corps so that they can work together. You'd want to create a development bank so that there's capital for them to get it. And then you'd want to work with the diaspora and others to create export markets. So there are a lot of things they can do.
I want to jump in on the national service. This is just me trying to think, the person who's going to come with a negative, because frankly, let me just say, my mother says this all the time: national service saved her. But what would you respond? How would you respond to people who may say to you, listen, the age and the era for national service has gone by. Young people, as even those who, unfortunately may not have gone far in school, they're not interested in national service. They're interested in gadgets and social stuff.
National service could be an area where you do gadgets, where you do science, technology, engineering, maths, where you do IT. Israel does it. Why are they successful? Because you're conscripted into the Israeli army for a period of time where you not only learn military skills, and we need about 20,000 more GDF people just to manage our resources, and that's the area of jobs. But this is being done all over the world, where you take your young people and you let them understand, first of all, your national assets, your national patrimony, and then you give them the types of skills that they can then use to create jobs. Israel has massive agricultural farms with all sorts of different technologies, because a lot of the land is dry. So that's what Israel does for their national security. So those who say we don't need a national security are blind, because they don't understand why we have high crime. They don't understand the educational profile of our young people, where 50% of them don't have more than a primary school education. We have a lot of illiteracy. We can't even pass English. We can't even pass math. The national service would have been a vehicle to address all those issues whilst introducing them to the land. And land is our wealth. Whilst introducing them to all the fruits and vegetables we have. Whilst teaching them how to work in corps. Whilst exposing them to appropriate technologies. Whilst giving them the freedom to think and to understand that Guyana is an incredible, rich country. So national service, regardless of who wins the next elections or who's in power, if we do not have national service, we will always have unemployment in this country. We can't compete. It's just common sense. Look at your workforce, look at the school system, look at why jobs aren't being created, look at what the private sector needs to do, and look at this 83,000 square miles of all these rare earths, of gold, diamond, manganese, of water. We should be exporting water. Where are the young people who we put in a company to create a water export company? The problem is the banking system won't support it. So you needed a development bank. So national service is a national security issue. People get caught up in the ethnicity and the race and all the history of it. Israel is doing it today, and they're one of the most successful countries in the world. So let's stop being blind.
So much information from you, and I can't believe the time has gone by so quickly today. We have maybe about 4 minutes left or so.
Oh my goodness, and I haven't even gotten into that.
Yeah, because now I want you to use those 4 minutes now to talk about and the things that you can get to almost immediately. What else is in the plan?
Well, the plan is to create an entrepreneurial ecosystem of 200 young people in 10 villages where there's a lot of land.
Okay.
We would train them in terms of the academic things, how to brand, how to market, how to run business, how to be entrepreneurs. We would work with them to show them how to create capital. We'll work with them how to create markets. And then we would work with them to make sure that they understand exporting and get it like that. So they'll stay in their villages, they'll get a stipend. We'll work with them to develop community development plans. So each village is different. So depending on the village profile, depending on the land, depending on the skills in the village, we would customize it. And within 6 months, we'd have a group of 200 young people, well, 20 per community. So it could be 50 communities. But we would target 20 per community, equally male and female, and work through with them to use the natural assets that are available to them. Then we would work with the government to make sure that the School of Agriculture is involved, with NARI to make sure drainage is there, with Go Invest to make sure that the appropriate investment comes into them. We'd form joint ventures, we'd form strategic partnerships. We would create a different CSR policy for Exxon and all these groups so that there's a natural market.
Okay.
And we would make sure that this is transferable to any young person regardless of race, religion, or creed.
In 2 minutes, you said you went to 2 villages yesterday.
Yes.
I would like you to give whether negative or positive, the response so far from the villages and also the response from government thus far.
The government has fully supported this. I first shared this with the president, and he wrote me a letter saying it's a good idea.
Okay.
Then I went to the Minister of Finance. I went to the Minister of Social Cohesion, the young person, Ms. Maika. I've spoken to lots of people in those ministries so that we can understand. Ministry of Agriculture I've spoken to because they would have to be involved. They all love the idea. The dilemma is that it comes back to the educational system we have. So we have to go and choose people who can really work into this program and bring them along. So it's something that is absolutely critical, because we need to develop village economies. We need to develop economies that can export. We need to prepare for green energy. We need to get ready for cheaper energy. And we need to stop growing the same thing.
Okay.
We have a massive comparative advantage that we need to convert into competitive advantage.
30 seconds, the response from the villages.
Absolutely positive.
Okay, great. And I think that's a perfect note to end on. We're going to have to bring Mr. Phillips back, and because we're going to want an update on this program. Again, the emphasis is always to ensure that these things we start acting on them instead of having these things.
But
just
I'd like
sitting
you
on
to
someone's
also
desk.
address the other issues about the private sector and job creation and national service. We have to face the tough problems.
Great.
Where are we going to educate our people?
Great points. Viewers, unfortunately, our time has come and gone today. This has been another edition, our first edition for the year of Conversations in State. I would have been chatting with Mr. Eric Phillips, who is the co-author of Guyana 21 and Guyana 2030. Plans, we'll try to have him sometime back, not in the not so distant future. I am Malika Ramsey, thanking you so very much for joining us, and of course, join me again next time. This has been Conversations in State.